Welcome to First City News, Beyond the Headlines. I'm News Director Dave Foster. It was on August 5th this year that local resident Taylor Hendershot died following a shooting outside a 6th Street business in Vincennes. 32-year-old Dylan Allen Smith charged with murder and remains in the Knox County Jail without bond. The case has raised several questions, including why the death penalty cannot be sought, and also it has brought forth some issues concerning domestic violence in the community. And here to discuss some of those issues is Knox County Prosecutor Dirk Carnahan. We thank you for being here with us today. And we do want to say, before we move into the discussion, that the defendant is presumed innocent until otherwise proven. So let's just start out. For those who may not be familiar with the legal process, just explain why the death penalty is not an option.
Okay. Now, and I want to make it clear, I'm not talking about a specific case, but just about the death penalty in general. The death penalty in Indiana is kind of a mirage. The fact that we have a death penalty makes some people happy. The fact that it's almost impossible to use makes other people happy. In order to even request the death penalty, according to statute, you have to be able to prove certain aggravating factors. And they are not the typical aggravating factors that you would think of. You know, I see people throw around the word premeditated a lot. The word premeditated doesn't appear in Indiana statutes anywhere. It's not an element, it's a TV word. It's got nothing to do with real life. In order to seek the death penalty, you have to prove certain aggravators, such as if a defendant has a previous murder conviction. Now, think about that. How practical is that? How many people do we have out wandering around with a murder conviction who would actually commit another murder? Another one of the aggravators would be that a person has committed another murder even though they've not been convicted of it. There are other aggravators, things like dismembering the victim, decapitating the victim, burning the victim to dispose of the body. If the murder was in fact committed in a church or a school, while church services or while school was taking place, if the person was in a prison or a facility at the time. There are a number of exceptions like that. They're all very narrowly tailored, and none of them apply in this particular case that you mentioned. And I got to tell you, you know, over the years, I have prosecuted, you know, I was the chief deputy here 30 some years ago and tried a number of murder cases then, have tried a number since I was elected prosecutor. None of those would have been applicable for the death penalty, even the fact that some of them were pretty gruesome. I think maybe the fact that social media is much more prevalent now, and people, when they feel frustration about something tragic, like the case that you mentioned, that, you know, they want to lash out and talk about things, and that's probably why we're discussing it. But it's not even an option whether I wanted it to be or not.
Yeah. So what potential penalties could a defendant be facing in a case like this?
Well, in a case like this, the normal penalties are the murder penalties, where we're talking 45 to 65. And I've also sought a firearm enhancement. If you commit certain crimes that are on a list and you use a firearm, and murder happens to be one of those crimes, then you can get an additional 5 to 20 years, and that would be up to the judge. So the defendant in this case is looking at from 45 to 85 years.
Now, you put out a post on social media shortly after the incident, and you talked about the criminal record. Why did you feel it was necessary to kind of talk about that in this?
Well, you know, a case like this is an opportunity to actually help victims of domestic violence or survivors of domestic violence who are out there who are struggling with whether or not to come forward. They're trying to get the courage to come forward. And when they see people who are really uninformed about specific facts talking about how the system let someone down, or it makes them less likely to gather the courage to come forward. And in this case, there were a lot of comments about how the system, now I'm not going to talk about Illinois, because apparently there's some legal matters going on in Illinois, and I don't want to comment on those, and if they drop the ball somewhere, then that's a question to ask them. But whenever you want to talk about the system here, this particular defendant, the only thing he's had in the last 14 or 15 years was a resisting law enforcement, which the judge set an appropriate bond on, and he posted the bond and then went to Illinois to deal with the charge there. Before that, if you're talking about Knox County and the Knox County system, what this defendant has are all minor offenses. He's got a battery offense, a misdemeanor battery offense from 14 or 15 years ago, where he was in jail on a drug possession. Other than that, we're talking about underage drinking, possession of marijuana, trespass, theft, nothing that would have allowed, now this was before I was prosecutor, but still there's nothing that would have allowed the judges at the time or even the prosecutor at the time to keep this person locked up. Definitely nothing that could have sent him to prison, and certainly nothing that would have had him still locked up at this time.
Yeah. And you talked about domestic violence. Mm-hmm. This case has brought it back into the forefront, and I think it is much more prevalent in the community than many people realize.
It is. It absolutely is. I think a lot of our caseload consists of domestic violence now, unfortunately. And I don't know whether it has become more prevalent or we're doing a better job at detecting it and a better job encouraging and empowering people to come forward. But whatever the reason, we are seeing more of those cases now than we used to.
I know as we record this, it's early in the week, and there were already 3 arrests, I think, in the county that deals with the domestic violence. And you've spoken about how the community and the legal system fight every day. You said that in your post. Mm-hmm. Can you kind of describe, give us an example of how local agencies like yours work to support those who need help?
We have worked, this time, I've been prosecutor now for, I think I'm going on my 11th year here. Time flies when you're having fun, right? And from the very beginning of that time, we worked to get a grant to get a victim advocate so that the victims and survivors could have a voice that they didn't have at the time. We also originally worked really closely with Hope's Voice. Hope's Voice is one of the only local organizations that really are advocates for domestic violence victims and survivors. And at least in their early time, whenever I was first elected, they hadn't yet obtained solid grant funding, and we helped support them with the user fee money that we bring in from deferral of speeding tickets and things like that. And we gave them a considerable amount of money each year to help keep them afloat. We work hand in hand with them, even yet today, so that they can provide services for the people. One of the hardest things that we've got, though, is trying to encourage the survivors of domestic violence both to come forward, which is why I think talking with you today is important, because I want them to know that everyone in the system really wants to support and help them. There are people, countless people in the system, who fight every day, lose sleep over these cases, and work their tails off to bring these people to justice. Now, one of the difficult things about keeping them involved, though, is the fact that the caseload that we have makes these cases take a lot longer than they should. We've got a lot of trial dates that have 30 or 40 cases set for trial. I'll tell you that's down from 10 years ago whenever we first started working on this, where we had trial settings with 200 cases set for trial on the same day. But obviously if you've got 30, then most of that 30 are going to have to be moved to another date. And it's really hard to have a survivor to keep faith in the system when the trial date gets moved and it gets drug out for a while. It's just a number game, though. A study done by the state shows that we should have at least another court. A study done by the state says that we should have 5 more prosecutors to handle the caseload that we've got. The fact that we are understaffed makes it difficult to move cases as quickly as we otherwise should. Think about this. Knox County spends more than twice as much paying part-time public defenders as it does funding the prosecutor's office to prosecute these crimes. And the money that they pay the public defenders is just for the hourly work of the public defender. What they pay us is for staff and everything that we do. And through no fault of the county, they have, for the most part, worked pretty well with me in the last few years in trying to make improvements. And we've made a lot of improvements, but the numbers game is still a crunch. So one of the things that we have to do with our victims and survivors is keep them engaged in the process. That means we have to meet with them a lot, we have to talk to them a lot, Our victim advocate fields phone calls all times of the day or night. We work with these people. A lot of times become more friends and counselors than anything else to try to keep them engaged and stay involved in the process, because without the survivor's participation, justice becomes difficult.
Yeah. And when cases like this happen, you can't stop people from going online and saying what they want to say, and there's misinformation out there. So I guess, what would you say to someone who wants to spread misinformation or don't know what's happening and gets online and goes off?
Well, that's just human nature, and it's brought out, and the worst part of it is brought out by social media. The people who are loudest and talk the most are generally the ones who know the least about a subject. When we're talking about domestic violence or a murder case or a child sex abuse case or any of the really terrible cases that we deal with every day, it's easy to be frustrated and want to lash out. And when you don't have information and do that, you don't really accomplish anything. And what it does, particularly in domestic violence cases, you have victims who are sitting out there today. We have victims today who are sitting out there thinking about coming forward, wondering if they're going to see tomorrow, wondering if they or their kids are going to be injured or homeless or die. And they're reading things on social media about how the system let somebody down and the system won't support them and the system this and the system that. They read that, it's really easy to be discouraged and not want to come forward. There are others who are already in the process who, because of the numbers, their trial date has been moved 2 or 3 times. And they're wondering if there's ever going to be an end to it. And now they're reading, nobody's going to support you, the system's going to let you down, this is going to end badly for you. Why should they continue to be brave and fight the fight that they're fighting? So that's why it becomes important for me to address misinformation and try to let people know there's no one in the system, whether it is a law enforcement officer, to the paralegals in my office, to the prosecutors in my office, my investigator, my victim advocate, even the judges and the court staff, there is no one who wants someone who commits domestic violence to get away with no consequence. There is no one in that system who wants to see any of these victims or survivors hurt or harmed in any way again. And so we do what we can do, and sometimes it's a stacked deck for a number of different reasons.
Yeah. And so if people are victims or they want help, they can certainly contact Hope's Voice, like you mentioned, or even your office or
Yes.
the police, right?
Yes.
So, is there anything else you'd like to cover that we haven't? Any message you'd like for the community to take away with what we've talked about today?
I think if you really want to see domestic violence decrease and you want to see consequences increase, you want to see fewer people hurt, fewer people harmed, fewer kids growing up in bad situations, then we have to educate people and we have to empower the survivors in these cases to be able to come forward and advocate on behalf of themselves. That's really difficult to do, and honestly that becomes the problem in most of these cases. I can tell you 30-some years ago I had a woman calling me at my house who was a victim in one of these cases and saying, please dismiss the cases against my abuser. He's a changed man, we're going to be married, things are going to be great. I refused to do so. My boss at the time had a different opinion, and he offered a deal where the man got out. Just a few days later, he murdered her really brutally. That's not been the only time either. I mean, it was maybe last year. I'm sitting in a bond hearing and trying to keep a domestic violence abuser in jail, and his victim was on the stand testifying to the judge. The judge was a fill-in judge just here for that day, not from our county, telling that judge, we're going to work things out. You need to let him out. I need him in my life. And I'm telling this judge, this is exactly the kind of person who's going to kill her. The judge let him out. He said, well, she wants him out, so I'm going to let her out. I'm going to let him out. And it was a few days later that she was brutally murdered. So here's the problem in so many of these cases. Our victims and survivors are scared. They've been convinced that the bad guy's got a lot more power and influence than he does. That's how they keep control. And so it's easier for them to appear to be on the bad guy's side and hope that the system does something anyway. You know, I want you released. I did everything I can do to get your charges dismissed, while secretly hoping that the system will do something. In most of those cases, when we don't have the cooperation and the advocation of the victim or the survivor, it's difficult for us to get results. So sometimes those are the kinds of cases where we have to make some kind of plea agreement. Now, I know the internet goes crazy about that. Why did they cut a plea for this abuser? Well, in many cases, even a lenient plea is better than losing the case and getting nothing. And in a lot of cases, that's the type of analysis that we have to make and the kind of weighing that we have to do. So if you want to see more punishment, if you want to see fewer domestic abuse, if you want to see victims having power over their own lives, the way to do that isn't to sit on social media and say, we need more punishment, we need more convictions, we don't need plea agreements. Then what you need to do instead is you need to figure out ways to encourage the people that you know. There's somebody watching this right now that has someone in their life that they know is being abused, and they're just sitting back and letting it happen. You need to encourage that person to come forward. It's not going to change until they do. And when they do come forward, you're going to have to encourage them to be brave and stay with it. You're going to have to advocate for yourself. If you want results, you have to advocate for yourself. Now, we'll provide all the support in the world to help you do that, but without friends and family that are also going to come forward and do that, it becomes much more difficult. So there's really the first step. We've got great resources. I mentioned Hope's Voice. I mentioned our victim advocate. Our law enforcement agencies, we provide them with a lot of training. They provide a lot of their own training on these cases. They're getting better and better each day. But until we get the victims and survivors educated, empowered, and willing to help us fight alongside us, then we're not going to make as big of a dent on this problem as we should.
I don't think it can be said any better than that. So we thank you for being here, Prosecutor Dirk Carnahan. Thank you for being here to discuss the case and about domestic violence in our community. And again, if anybody has any questions, they can always contact your office.
That's right.
So, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
First City News will continue to follow the case we mentioned, so be sure to follow our website as well, and also our social media pages and our YouTube channel for more information on resources on domestic violence. For First City News, Beyond the Headlines, I'm News Director Dave Foster.